Hello, my name's Gary and I'm one of the tech support people at Donor Management, and welcome to this introduction for Donman. And what we're going to look at today primarily will be the donor entry screen and some of the fields, and I'll explain some of the functionality as we go through. When you first start up Donor Management, this is the screen you will start on, and the area that we're going to go into first of all today will be under donor entry. So this is the screen where we store basically all of the contact details, and other associated information attached to the donor record will be from here accessible via certain buttons on the screen as far as donor history, notes, additional addresses, etc. So on the main screen itself, the donor number field up the top here, where the cursor is at the moment, is a mandatory field, and the system will normally dictate the next number in sequence. So if I were just to press enter, the system will automatically give me the next donor number. However, if I'm just looking up an existing record, there's two ways I can primarily do it. If I know the ID number of the donor that I'm looking for, because I've sent some correspondence or I've sent an appeal letter or something similar, and on that coupon I've got the donor ID number, then I can just type the number in of the donor, and I don't need to actually do any further lookup. That will be that person's record. If perchance I don't have that, there is a button down the bottom here called Multi-Find, and if I click on here, this is where I can search the data. So if I were to put something like SM in and then search, the system will sort, in this case, or search for all records where the surname starts with SM. In the system itself, or within Donman, there are three main files that the system will search by default. In this case, I've only got people matching the surname I'm looking for in donors, but if I've archived records, the system will automatically search the archives, or if there's additional address records. So if I've got second addresses like PO boxes, or I've got PA's details, or I've got anything like that, the system will search these records by default. And at the top of the screen here, there'll be more tabs to show to say what you searched for was available in one of the other fields. So from there, if I were just to double click on one of the records, will then take me into the main record for that person. So you can see up the top here, we've got the donor number. Across from there, there's the user number, which is basically an alphanumeric code, which doesn't need to be a unique code and can be used for any sort of alternate ID. In the case of medical places like hospitals, etc. like that, that may be for UR numbers or patient numbers, and it allows me to cross-reference databases. If perchance I'm dealing with a telemarketing company or something like that, where they've got their own unique IDs and I've got mine, then that's where we can utilize the external company's ID numbers to put that there. And most of the programs that we use then to import data from those external companies will look at that number first and say, well, that's the same person, and allocate the donations or update the record to suit without doing any further duplicate checking. From there, the first part of the screen is fairly self-explanatory as we go through. There's title, there's first name, surname, and the last box after surname is for post-nominals. So if somebody's an OBE or any distinction that we want to put there, we can put those into the field, and it's really just a matter of typing those in. So whatever it is you want, if there's more, we can just put a space and put more characters in there. From there, we have, in this case, I've got a corporate record or a business record. So I've got a position and I've got a company name. And the first of the drop-down lists where I've got a mandatory field, and if I click into there, you can see now at the right-hand side here, I've got the three drop-down buttons. So this will take me into a list that is controlled by what I've set up in the actual database itself. So this is basically where I start to set up the structure of my system as far as business records, clubs, associations, educational institutions, deceased estates, government records. So really whatever coding you want here you can have, but normally this would be just like most data structures, this will be the hierarchical code. So if I was going to have something like clubs and associations, I don't normally do it down to the level of saying what sort of club they are. I can use other things to distinguish that, and I'll explain that a bit more as we go through. So in this case here, I've got a business record, and the last column here is dictating where it's got a sort by, it's either C or S, which is the company field, or the surname and first name. So in this case, the system has automatically generated the sort key based on the organization name. This has two impacts in the system. One is when I do reports, and the other one is when I do receipting. It's telling the system, for the sake of receipting or reporting, that this is the organization's record, the person is my contact. Whereas if I had a record that was an individual, the sort key will then be based on the person's surname and the first four initials of their first name. The salutation can be generated automatically, and the defaults that you can have are dear title first name, as I've got here, or you can have a dear title surname. If perchance I've got somebody who doesn't have a first name, or I just have an initial, if in this case I'll just go up and edit the record and go through, the system will then say, you've changed the name, do you want to update the salutation of the gender? So as I enter through, so it's now put Dear Mr. Smith, because obviously I wouldn't want to have Dear W. Okay? So based on what we've put into the data itself, the system will try and work out, based on what rules I've set for the salutations, what will be my default salutation. If perchance I just wanted to have Mr. W. Smith in the name, but down in the salutation I wanted to put Dear Warren, then you can certainly do that. There's absolutely nothing to stop us from doing that at all. From there, I've got the street addresses. There's Street 1, Street 2, Street 3, suburb, state, postcode, etc. There are two external tools that you can use to add to donor management, which you can look up addresses. One is the rapid addressing tool, and the other one is called Quick Address System. In this case here, I've got the rapid addressing tool, and if perchance I wanted to change the address or look up the address, I can clear. Okay, so you can see, just like when I do it in a Navigator or any other program like that, I'm basically looking up the address in reverse order. Okay, so if I were to say, put in any suburb at all, start typing it, it will show me what's available. Okay, so if I start putting that in, said, okay, this is the suburb that I'm looking for. So you can do it based on the postcode or the suburb name. As I start typing in the street, you can see I haven't had to type in the whole name of the street. I can just type in the first letter, and it's showing me that these are the two options available in that suburb. So if I choose the first one in this case, and from there I can put my number in, and from there, so the system's now showing me on the screen that it's matched and found this record based on the Australia Post database, and I've got a barcode and I've got the DPID number. If I just enter or click on the transfer button at this point, that will transfer the updated address onto the record. So you can see in this case, as I enter through, it's already got the suburb, state, postcode, it's got the DPID number and the pre-sort number, which is basically the mail centre number used by Australia Post when we're doing bulk mailing. The first of the places on the screen the system will do a duplicate check is under the postcode. So as soon as I get to this record and I get to the postcode, there's a brief delay then when the system has done the duplicate check. If it found somebody with a similar surname in the same postcode or a similar company name in the same postcode, it would have alerted me on the screen to say possible duplicates have been found and do I want to view them. So normally I would say yes, because the last thing I want to do is start putting duplicate records into my database. Okay. From there, if I had an email address, telephone number, homework, etc., so in this case, okay, so I can put in a, okay. So the system also does a duplicate check based on the email addresses, because as we're discovering with more online fundraising activities, peer-to-peer fundraising, etc., email is something that also comes up where sometimes people might have put their name in as, you know, Rob Smith or Robert Smith or different connotations, so you might not find the record based on what you think is in your database. So if I say yes to possible duplicates, it will then come up and show me the record that's a possible duplicate, in this case not based on the name, based on the email address that I've put in. Okay. So in this case I'll escape and say no, it's not the same person, that's fine. Okay. From there, telephone work, home, fax and mobile. The system itself has no format for putting in the phone numbers because everyone has different, you know, needs or whatever they want to do. But primarily, if I was putting in something and I was doing something in Victoria, so I put 03, put the first 4 digits, and put the last 4 digits. Okay. Two reasons for that. One is readability, and the other one is the most common thing people tend to do with data is put it into Excel. So this will stop Excel from truncating my telephone number and deleting the 0 from the front. This is specifically common in mobile numbers, where people will just put a mobile number, especially online, where there won't be a gap in the number, and Excel will do what it's designed to do. It will take the number off the front of, the 0 off the front of your number. Okay. From there, if I go down, the next of my drop-down fields is the mail code, and this is where I can use the system in two sort of different ways, depending on the size of the organization or how complex your mailings are. If in the case of simple mailings where I said, look, people get all mail, or they just get the newsletter, or they get tax or Christmas, and there's no real crossover, then I can use the codes as they are on the screen. If perchance I said, no, I've got a much more complex structure for that, I've got people that are on e-news lists, I've got volunteer lists, I've got all sorts of things I want to do, then instead of using the mail code like this, I might have something like this one here that just says they're on list. And then next to that on the screen, I've got a list button, and this is where I can have all of the different mailing, or correspondence lists that I need to generate. And if I needed to add somebody to a list, I could do that manually. So in this case, if I'm going to put this person on the newsletter and say they're also going to get my 4 main appeal letters for the year, I can do that and then OK. There is a mechanism in the system where I can set that as the default value based on the type of donor that I put in. So for business records, I might have different lists that I automatically put them on as opposed to individuals. And if the record has been added to a list, you can see now that the button called List down here has been highlighted, which means there are some values there. On the right-hand side, you'll notice other buttons, and again, they're red if there's information there attached to this record. When I do the selections for mailings, if perchance, no, I don't want to check for dupes again, if perchance I've put people on and said there's no mail donor here, the system by default, when we look at selections a little bit later in the process, will automatically exclude people that are marked no mail in this field here. Or on the right-hand side, there's a field just under the last change date here of no mail until, which is where I update people who have indicated they're going away for an extended period of time. And by default, I don't want to mail them until that date passes, and I don't want to go down and change their mail list, because the chance that I'm going to remember to come back and do that one record out of my whole database later is very, very slim. The field under that in the system itself is just called a user code, so it can be renamed on the screen and used for your own purposes. From there, in this case, I've called it Why No Mail, which means I would then have a drop-down list of reasons why this record is not getting mailed. Because traditionally, in most databases, if I mark somebody not to get mail, unless somebody happens to be looking at that record and there's notes or something to indicate why they're not getting mailed anymore, I'm going to lose that. If I mark somebody no mail and say the reason they're not getting no mail is down here because they might request no mail, I might have RTS where I haven't been able to look up the record yet or update them, it's really just giving me something on the screen that I can look at to know why this record was marked no mail. The next two fields would be the flag 1 and flag 2 fields. Again, these are just fields that I can rename on the screen, and unlike the why no mail, it's not a drop-down list, it's something that's purely just a yes-no value. So it can be used for really any purpose you want, where you just say, look, I need a true or false value on the screen that I can use when I'm segmenting the data. As we go through, the sex field or the gender field is automatically updated by the system based on what I've put up in the title. If I put something like doctor or professor or anything that's outside of the normal Mr., Mrs., Miss, etc., the system won't put anything in there. And sometimes even based on the person's name, I might not know what gender they are. It's not a mandatory field, and you can leave it blank. If perchance I were to go through this record again, the system will look at the title and automatically generate that back again anyway. So it's just something the system will put in if you don't. The VIP is just a yes-no field. The alternate salutation is used by some organizations where I might want to have on the main screen here, I might have Dear Mr. Smith, and under the alternate salutation, I can have Dear Warren. So it gives me the option to be able to write to the person one way or the other, and it's also a good facility where I've got a number of people in the same household that I'm sending newsletters or something similar to. From there, gifts in kind is purely a yes-no value, but if I say yes, will put me into the field below that, where I'll have different codes to identify the sort of things that this person does give me as a gift in kind. The actual details of what the person has given me as a gift in kind gift can be recorded the same as a financial transaction, but the dollar amount itself isn't captured so that it doesn't intermingle with my financial reporting at the end of the year. From there, the acquisition date will be the date that you create the record. So whenever I've created a new record, it will by default be today's date. If I was updating data or something, I can change the date to suit, but normally we just leave the default. From there, we'll have the initials of the staff member who's changed this record and the date the record was last changed. So you can't, as you can see, I can't get into those fields. They're purely controlled by the system. They are good fields for, if I wanted to find out how many records, not just how many records have donated in a certain date range, but how many records have changed. I've got something on each person's record or each company record that will tell me that that has happened. The no mail until field is the one that I was referencing just before, where if this person has said, look, I'm going to be away till mid-September or something, then I can just put in the date there. And by default, when I do a selection for mailing, this record will be excluded until that date passes. So it's just like a temporary flag that I'm putting onto the person's record. Date of birth is a lovely field if you can get it, but it is something that's becoming much harder to obtain from the donors because they're saying, well, that's something that really you don't need to know. Some organizations can, ask it. Some people will give you, and of course lots of people won't under privacy laws and things like that. From there, the donor source is the next of my drop-down list, and this is where I can have really as many codes as I need to identify the different sorts of things that we're doing that are attracting people to the database. Like what sort of activity is it? Was it an in memoriam donation? Was it something that came from online, etc. So that I don't need at this point here to have dates or years attached to the codes because I've got the acquisition date of the donor up here. So if I wanted to find out how many people were put onto the database from different source codes, I've got those 2 bits of information already. If you're an organization that has membership, then I can have member yes, no here, and then the field next to there, I can have different levels of membership. So if I've got family membership, couples, singles, or I might have tiers of membership where I've got bronze members, silver members, gold, platinum, whatever structure you've got, we can then mimic that within the system. The user code 2 field, just after the membership one, is another field that we can rename on the screen and you can use for your own purposes. So basically you can rename it and use it as a drop-down list for anything you like. So in this case here we can see it's been set up as types of religion, but there's no restriction to what you can use that for. The next field down has duplicate use in the system. One of them is to look at a record and say, I want to regionalize the database based on the postcode that the record belongs to. So in this case here, based on the region, if I enter, you can see now that's updated from what it was, New South Wales, up to Victoria, because within the structure of the database, I've set up a coded field or a file that has a list of postcodes and then which region I want that record attached to. So it can be down to anything if you're doing some reporting that's required by the Department of Health or anything similar to that, you can set up your own regions to suit, and that allows me to record. The region code itself can also be passed to when I process payments from people, so I can do regional breakdowns on the transactions. From there, bought goods will update automatically if I've done some sort of merchandising within the system. So if I'm selling entertainment books or T-shirts, hats, any sort of merchandising, when we look at setting up a campaign record in order to put funding into Donman, and then later on reporting on it, based on how I set that up, the system will automatically update this for me to say, yes, I bought goods, and the dollar total here will be the cumulative total of goods that the person's bought. From there, we start with the buttons that are additional information we can attach to the donor. From there, we have the address button. And this is where the most common use for this would be if a donor had moved address, I want to capture their old address. So in this case, if I choose previous, I can then click on the big button down the bottom here. That will copy all of the donor's current details across. I can save that, and then I can go back to the main screen and update their new address. Also useful in the case of if I've got a company where I had a PO box, and I've also got a physical street address. So in that case, I can use a different code here to identify what sort of address that is. So Again, you can have no end of addresses attached to a particular record, and when you create data to write to this person, there is an option to choose which address type you're looking for. So in the case of, say, membership or something like that, where you might have a Mr. and Mrs. on the main screen, but you wanted to know only one of them was a member, then you can have an address type in here, a member, and when you do membership mailings, you could use that address so that it only pulls out the member that is actually and he pulls out the details of the donor, who is also a member. The involve button is more when we have internal involvement. So we wanted to know that this person was, say, on the board or a committee or something like that. So in there I've got different codes that I can create. I can then put the person's role on the board, the start date and the end date, and then any comments about them being in that position on that committee or the board, whatever it might be. So it's really for internal sort of information that does get lost to a lot of organizations, where I wanted to know that this person was involved in the organization as a staff member or something else, and I want to capture that information. Okay, so if I normally put my dates in, once I get to there I can close that, and once I refresh the screen, okay, so you'll see now that these buttons have now highlighted to say I have put some information in there. The two buttons after that are purely spare buttons, and they've been put into the system to allow us to have extra functionality for organizations that might say, look, we need to have a special module or add-on written to the system because we've got some data that's fairly unique to what we're capturing and what we're doing, but we want it attached to the main record. Yeah, so for a lot of organizations, they will just say that they're spare and they're unused buttons. The next button available on the screen is the Notes button. There are 4 separate notepads available, and as you can see at the moment, I've just got some rubbish notes in there. I can rename the 4 different notepads, and each notepad at the moment will hold somewhere around 15,000 characters. If I were to put a new note in, especially electronically, what I want to do is move everything down. I can then click on Insert Date. It will put today's date in my user login, and from there I can put the details of my note. If perchance I wanted to attach a document or a photo or anything similar to that to the person's record, down the bottom of the note screen I've got Insert Link, and if I click on there, it will allow me to browse to anywhere on my network, and I can create a shortcut link to pretty much any sort of file. If perchance I was putting in bequest notes, I can restrict which users have access to the notepad. So normally general is open to everybody, but the 3 other notepads I can restrict so that certain people, or staff that don't need to have access to those notepads don't see that those notepads are available. But from there, exactly the same process. I can put in some notes, whatever it might be, about visitations or anything else that I've had to do with that person. If I save, next time I go into notes, I can now see that there's also some notes under the bequest area. So just about everywhere within the system, if the button is highlighted, it's just telling me there's additional information to capture. The other sorts of things that I can have on the donor, as you can see here, we've got trust. So if I had a trust organization and I wanted to put details in about application dates, times, etc., what sort of things they're interested in, whether they're discretionary, whether they have a manager, different states, etc. From there, I can have details of all of the applications, and really it's just a way to manage all of the applications that we've put into the trust, and we want to keep all of that so I can look at them later. Okay. The relations is any sort of physical relationship between records. So in this case, there are no relationships set up at the moment. If I click on the Add or Edit Relations, I can then say that this record is whatever the relationship might be. So it might be employer, because in this case it's the company record. And from there I could go and find my other record. Okay? So whatever it might be, and say they are the employer of that person. As I enter through, it's now saying that dot is the employee of all sorts of imports. So it really doesn't matter what sort of relationship you're trying to put between the records. If perchance there's not one in the drop-down list at the moment that suits, you can certainly go and create a new relationship to suit, where we basically have the difference for all males and females. Sometimes it's exactly the same, as you can see in the one above where we've got Everyday Hero, and I'm saying, well, for the hero, it doesn't matter whether it's male or female, they are still the supporter of that person or the sponsor. Okay. So again, when I get out of there at the moment, if I were to refresh my screen, I can now see that there's relations. The bequest area is not so much the full, bequest, or I've just received the bequest check in the mail, but I haven't actually dealt with the person, etc. This is where we're trying to nurture people as potential bequesters. Okay. So when I click on there, I've basically got the name and address details from the main screen. I've got the summary of the person's history, and from there I can go through and start putting in other details of the record. So whatever coding you have, some people use colors, some people use codes to track from the time that we've sent somebody a brochure to we've had information, we're seeing them, they're interested, they're not interested, whatever it might be. Up to where it's a finalized bequest, I can have different codes in there. And then down the bottom of the screen, you can see I can then go through and add a whole lot more information about this person and their potential bequest or their confirmed bequest. So I've got details here of confirmed dates, insurance to us, their birthday, whether they're married, single, married, divorced, widowed, spouse's name, their interests, their children's names. The third page is where I keep more different sort of notes that I just want to have on them that's not in the general notepads. I can have a code there for the legal organization that might be handling the bequest. And on the last page is where we can track visits that we've had or visits that we've planned to have with our bequest people. So the people or the staff member who might be doing the bequest visitations can then utilize this to draw out some reports to say I'm looking for all the people in my system that are marked for certain sorts of bequests where I might need to visit them based on a geographic region or just based on the codes or when they're next due for a visit. So I can use any of those things to sort of pull that detail out. The only button on the screen at the moment that is a optional module is the volunteer module. And again, if I click there, the top part of the screen comes across automatically from the donor, and from there I'll then have the commencement date, date of birth, whether they've got someone available for emergency call, the status codes, etc. So all of the details I want to put against the volunteer I can have in here. I can have work areas placed. So if I said this person commenced today, I haven't got their date of birth at the moment, there's no one for an emergency call. From there I can have status, and again, all of these codes you create and use as you need to. There's no sort of set codes in the system. Sorry, my phone's ringing. There's no set code in the system. You have complete control over what you put in there. Okay. From there we can have work areas placed, and again, you can create the different work areas that you have at your organization in order to attach to the person's record. There's availability codes, which might be AM, PM, all day, or you might have 2-hour blocks, whatever you're using to, so that this person's available on that day, I can use. If the person drives for me, I can have registration numbers, I can have make and models cars, their license numbers, their expiry dates. If I've got police checks, etc., which is fairly mandatory now, I have police check codes and police check dates. So this will be the date that the police check expires, that I need to have that renewed. And exactly the same principle down the bottom of the screen, I've got a working with children check, and again I have a date in here which will be the date it expires, and they're the two fields I use to do reports on my volunteers for people that are due to have a check renewed, basically, so I can update their record, because I don't want people who are volunteering for us that may have had a license that's lapsed or any of those things. The next button across on the screen is functions, and this is where we try and keep tabs on people that we invite to an event, whether they've accepted, whether they've attended. The two places I can access this information is if I click on the function button itself, I'll have individual functions. If the person has more than one function record, down the bottom of the screen here, the button text will show red to tell me that there's more records to look at. Okay? So you can see on here I've got the Christmas 12 campaign, or the function. They got invited in November 2012. In this case, they accepted the same day, so it may have been an email invitation that went out. From there, how many people are attending, how many tickets they've got. I can put in the cost of the ticket, etc. In Donman, the system, as far as functions goes, isn't a fully blown function system because it's basically a donor management system. So it doesn't have the facility to set up tables and a number of chairs and things like that. There's certainly software packages out there that are geared purely towards that thing. This is more in the case of the donors that you have on your system and maintaining a history of things that you've invited them to, what they've accepted. So later on we can start to see trends of what sort of things that person is interested in. The button across from there, the pledges, is where we can have a pledge record for the donor, and pledges can be used for quite a few different things. In the case of membership, it would be a once-a-year pledge, where normally, as in this case here, I've got down the bottom here that this person needs a reminder letter. If I've got donors that have said, you can take money out of my, give me your authorization to take money out of their bank account or their credit card on a monthly basis, so I've got regular gifts, then I can still set up a campaign here. Okay, so I might have one called auto deduct. So in this case here, this donor is already a member, so I don't want to change this pledge record. If I clear the screen, I can now go down and say, set up a new one. So this person's now signing up for an auto deduction. They're signing up today, and they're going to give me $25 12 times a year. The data next gift hasn't auto-populated because for most organizations, there'll be a set date that we do the auto deductions. So if we were running it on the 15th of the month, I'd now set this so that it was on the 15th of the month. If the donor has said to me or indicated to us that they're only going to do this for a certain period of time, then I can put the number of installments pledged here, but normally that's not the case for a monthly gift. Okay? But you can see as I go through, the system has calculated the total. As each payment came in, the balance due would decrement until it got to the point where the pledge would cancel itself out. As I said, in the case of regular gifts, where I've got people doing monthly gifts, that's not necessary, so I can just leave that blank. The amount of next gift goes in, and from there, if the person was giving me their credit card or bank account details, I could say, yes, it's an auto deduction, it's a credit card payment, and from there I can put the details in of the credit card. Normally, with credit cards nowadays, people that are doing this, certainly if we're doing quite a few of these, would set up with using a gateway, and the two gateways that Donman will support when we look at processing donations in a later session, the two are Secure Pay or eWay. So what you would need to do is have an internet merchant account with your bank, which you can then use with the gateway account. So it just means that your system then pretty much becomes PCI compliant because you don't have credit card details stored within your data anymore. If perchance I didn't have something like that, and I said, I've got that, if I put in a card number, in this case I'll just use the test number, and enter through, the system now stores that, but it actually encrypts the number. So if for some reason someone did get my data and wanted to report on that, the credit card numbers themselves can't be extracted in plain text or anything like that. But certainly gateway is the way that we would suggest people use nowadays. If the person needs a receipt every month, which is normally not the case, I want to receipt them once at the end of the year. Okay? And if there's a particular ledger code that people have said, they want their money to go to a particular area of support, and I've got different ledger codes for it, I can choose that. But if it's just a plain one, I can just choose the donation one or leave that in the campaign, which is something, again, we'll look at later. If they're an auto deduction person, I wouldn't need to have reminders, but in the case of a membership, as we saw before, I would say, yes, they do need a reminder letter because it's a once-a-year pledge. Okay? So I can set up more than one pledge for the record, and as I go through now, you can now see, as I was saying before, the button here is red to indicate that there's more than one pledge record for that person. Okay? So if I escape out of there, the last button available on the screen is the picture button, and it's not used by a whole lot of people at the moment, or organizations, but it is somewhere where I can add a new picture, and I basically go and browse for that picture, and that will basically copy it into my structure, so my Donman structure on the network. And I can also put a caption on the picture. So something that I can use. As I said, the functionality of that is good for just straight pictures, but lots of people have their own picture editor or viewer as part of Windows, and if I use the link functionality or the shortcut functionality in Notes, then Windows will take over and open that up. If I do it through the picture area itself, the system will copy that into the structure of Donman. So sometimes I might make my data structure fairly big because I've got all these pictures there. The bottom of the screen, and this is pretty much the end of this main screen, and this is really the hub of all the information. So at the bottom here is where I can have things like extra codes, which are like status codes or attributes if people have used a product like OpenArms or something like that, where I've got attributes that I can attach to a record. So, you know, here you can see if the person was a board member, I could say, yes, they're a current board member. Yeah. They also might be, you know, someone who fundraises for me. They might be an everyday hero, etc. So for each record, I've got 8 of these extra codes available, and I can also use that when I'm doing the segmentation. So any of the fields on the screen that you see, you can use you know, one of the codes or multiple of the codes to identify different groups of people when we do segmentation for mailing or reporting or any of those things. So if I were to enter through, the bottom, there are 2 screens of information primarily on each donor. The first screen is the one we've looked at, and it is really the hub of just about all the information. If I enter down the bottom here, see most of the rest of this screen here, if I had appointments that I want to put in, then I can have a refer to code or a staff code here. I can have an appointment date and details, and that will go into a diary mechanism which Donman will maintain. From there, I've got fields for things like date of, a occupation code or male job and date of birth, and female job and date of birth. And that would only be used in the case of a couple. If I've got a single person, I can put the date of birth on the first screen. If the person has paid me donations or something previously, and I've recorded by check, the bank and branch details will be stored by the system just to make it easy to do the entry next time. Yeah. From there, things like whether the person's a subscriber, the date they last paid subscription, if they've given an in-memory donation to somebody, the date they gave in memory and who it was will be stored by the system. The receipt name can be stored different because sometimes it might be slightly different from the donor's name, or it might be a Mr. and Mrs. record where we're receiving to just one of the couple rather than both of them. In the case of an individual or company where I've got the web page address, I can put the address in here, and that will then give me a link over to the side, which I can go straight from the donor's record and into the browser. The details down the bottom of the screen are updated automatically as a summary of the donor's history. So it will show me their highest donation, their first, their last 3, their donation total from their very first gift till current, and I'll also have figures for total this year and last year and count. So I can quickly get an idea of picture of donors as far as their giving history, etc. And I can use any of these fields just like I can on the previous screen for doing mail outs and things like that. If I just go back to the first screen very quickly, and there's a couple of areas that we'll cover. If the record has got an email address like here, I can click on the email button down the bottom. The system will say enter a topic for your email, and I also get an option to add that to the person's contact records, which will be down under this button at the bottom here. So if I say test and say yes, I want to add it to their contact records. In this case here, because I haven't got Outlook running at the moment, that's going to start up, whereas normally that'll be much quicker. So it will automatically generate a new email address, new email message. So it's automatically put from myself the email address I'm sending it to, the subject, and because it's going through Outlook, it's already got my signature there. So I'd be pretty much be able to record that I'd sent that. In the person's history button, where I've clicked on the $ at the bottom, will show me the history of all the transactions, and one of those tabs will be contacts, where then later on I could look and see all of the different contacts that I've had with people. When we look at doing selections for mail-outs, that is something that we update in bulk for a whole lot of people. We don't do one at a time. A similar function exists if I'm doing a one-off letter to somebody. I can click on the letter button. Again, I can add it to the person's contact records. For this one, I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to enter through. And the details, as you see them there, will go into the clipboard. So I can then go into Word and paste that in one hit. without me doing a whole lot of alt-tabbing and copying and pasting. So I can get all of that in, and if I just go into the notes here and paste, okay, so you can see in this case here, because I have got a DPID and as such I've got a barcode, it's telling me here this is the actual barcode that you'll see, and it's telling me what I need to do is change the font of that and change the size so it actually becomes the barcode if I'm doing it. But normally in the case of a one-off mail, I wouldn't need to worry about those details because the barcode's not going to help me at all. So I can just get rid of those and I'll just basically from there have the details of the name and address of the person. Yeah, so that makes it just a little bit quicker to do that one-off mailing. There are 3 places on the screen I can use, which in my case here for my dummy data won't help at all. But if I'm in the surname and I click on the scroll button on my mouse or I do Control F3, we'll do a white pages search of the donor. If I do it on company, we'll do the same sort of thing. We'll do a white pages search, as you can see down the bottom here, of the donor. Or if I'm on the street address, I can do the same sort of thing and it will just take me to Google Maps. Okay, and just do a search of that record or the address. So if perchance I had an address that I wasn't using the addressing tools or things like that, so I wasn't using the RAT or the QAS system, and I just wanted to validate because it looked like the street name was spelt wrong or something strange about it or the number was really high, and I just wanted to validate, I can certainly use that to do the Google Map lookup. Also good when I'm doing overseas addresses. So if perchance I had an overseas record, on the screen here I can choose overseas, and it basically turns off the postcode validation on my data here. So down the bottom here, the postcode validation won't play any part anymore, and I have got an option then to put in the country code. Okay, so whether it's an Australian record or it's an overseas record, you've got the ability to put them in, and that will give you all of the details. So when I save a record, as I said, I do get to this summary screen here. If I then save the record again, I'm back on a blank screen, which means I've now saved that record. I can create a new one or look up another person. Okay. So that's fairly much, oh sorry, there's one other area. On the screen itself here, where I've got these drop-down lists, I haven't got the ability to create, edit, or delete them on this screen here. And that's purely for safety, where I'd normally have a administrator of the database or a couple of people that are responsible for the structure of the system, because it's paramount to how we extract the data later. The only place I can do that is under the housekeeping menu here, and I've got then the descriptive codes, and this is where I've got all the different sorts of codes. So normally this would be a menu that would be restricted to who can access it. At the moment, because I'm set up as an administrator, I can get into any of these areas, but it is something that normally we would restrict, because unless you're a fairly small organization, we want to control what sort of coding we have in our system. Yeah? So that fairly much concludes the first area, which is the main donor screen. And the next part we're going to look at is setting up a campaign in order to do our fundraising and collecting mail, etc. Hello, thanks for joining us. My name is Gary from Donman, and what we're going to look at today is another installment in our sort of introduction series to Donman. And the previous one we looked at the donor entry screen and details that can be recorded there. And for this particular one, we're now going to look at setting up our system in order to record transactions for donations or anything else that we might be doing. So from my start menu here, there's 2 ways that I can get to the campaign setup menu. I can go through the main menu. I'll have my organization name, fundraising, and I can go into the campaign setup menu. And these are the areas that I need in order to set up the actual campaign record itself. The first option on my menu is the thank you letter code. And if we go into there, so this is where I have a code to identify the text of the thank you letter that I want to send to that person. Because for each fundraising activity I do, basically, what I want to do is send personalized text. So I don't want to, send everyone one general letter if, that we're raising money for a particular purpose, or, we're doing an event or anything like that, I want the text of the thank you letter to reflect what the person has helped us out by doing. The same sort of thing. So you can see here, I've got, if I've received a bequest, I've got estates, I've got a general donation thank you letter, there's in memoriam gifts, membership letters, merchandise. So again, you can have as many different letters as you need to, depending on what sort of fundraising you're doing. Each of these letters will, based on the code, sorry. So in this case here, where I've got general thank you letter, so in my working directory for donor management, I would have a letter or a physical document called letter, whatever the code was. Okay, so in this case here, I'd have one called letter _ general, and that would be the text of my thank you letter for the general donations. So the same sort of thing for in memoriam gifts, memberships, etc. I'll have different letters. So as I go backwards, so if for the sake of what I needed to do, I said, look, I've already looked at the letter code and I can see there's already a code there for general, but I want to update the actual text of the letter, or I want to create a new one. To create a new code, I just need to come in here, type the code, the description, and just enter through and save it. Once I've done that, the next item on the menu will just take me into Word. And it really doesn't matter which version of Word you are using. So this is where I can now type the letter of my thank you letter. So the thank you letter itself doesn't need to have the date, the name, address, salutation, or the receipt details. It is just the body of the thank you letter. And so it doesn't need to have everything in there. There is one document that we'd normally set up called the receipt template, which is the one that has the layout, so it suits our letterhead paper. We can have our graphics on there, we can have our header, footer, whatever we need to, but there's one field in the middle that will dictate the different text of a letter as it goes through. Okay. So for the purposes of this particular demonstration, we're not going to go through the whole structure of how to set that up. There are online webinars that we've run previously that sort of go through that whole process to do the letters and how they all link up. So in this case, if I said that's okay, I've already got a letter, so I don't need to do any editing. I can close Word. The next option on there would be the chart of accounts or ledger code. So the ledger code in Donman, so it's normally just referred to as the ledger, not the chart of accounts, but this is where we create a code or series of codes to match up with whatever you're using for your accounting system. Yeah. So the length for the field in Donman is 16 characters, which normally suits, or will fit the codes for most organizations. If I'm using something like MyOb or QuickBooks, I might have a coding structure similar to the one that's on the screen. And as you can see, when I create the code itself, in the case here for donations received, so I've got my code, so as I said, that would match my accounting code. So these are purely dictated by your accounting department or accounting person and what they're using in their package. So this is a code that we put into Donman so that we can reconcile the two systems as far as my income at the end of each month. Okay, so in this case, I've got a code just for donations received. Each of the codes within the system has got the ability to archive, displayed in the pop-up list, yes or no. And in this case here, this is a donation, so it's marked as D for deductible. If I'm doing something with sales or merchandising, etc., so I might then have something here where you can see here I've got merchandise sales, and it's marked no, it's not deductible, and the system will then calculate GST when I do receipts for any payments for that, or when I do reporting. Okay. So the bank accounts will be purely your bank account details, or if you've got multiple accounts, so you'll have the account name, the bank name, the account, the account number, the bank name, the account name, in case we have got multiple accounts, the BSB number, and from there we can have the merchant numbers for the credit cards. The merchant numbers that you use here will dictate, or be dictated, based on how we're actually sending the credit card details to the bank. So if we're using the gateway, the number that goes in here will be pretty much the number dictated by the gateway account. If we're doing something where we're uploading a credit card file to the bank, so we're using BPoint or we're using any of the other bank systems, and Donman has got the ability to upload to most of the major banks as far as the file structures for credit cards. I'll then have an electronic merchant number in these fields. Yeah, so it really depends on what you're using, and as you can see down the bottom, he's got gateway account number if I'm using multiple bank accounts. Yeah. So this part is something that we don't set up a whole lot, because once you set it up, unless you're changing banks or something like that, there's not a whole lot that needs to be done here. It's a one-off job. Once I have all of these details in place, on the right-hand side, I now set up my campaign code. Okay. So as you can see on the drop-down list here, the campaign code is basically the fundraising activity that I'm doing that I want to record funds against. Okay. So where we saw before, when we looked at the pledges briefly, I've got the auto deduction one there. Okay. If I've got general donations, okay, so I've got my code here just called general, whether you call it Gen Don or whatever you actually call the code is not that important at this point. From there I then have a full name, and I can have a group code. So the group code is purely something that I can use as an umbrella code that allows me to, at some point later, report on just a particular group of donations or different sorts of payments. So in my groups, okay, so I can have dinners, I can have events, I can have, membership. So all my membership years will go under one group code, my merchandising, etc. So I can have a whole lot of different groups where I might have 20, 30, 40 or more campaigns under each group. And as I said, it's really to help me do reporting and things later. If I was the chance running an appeal where I had multiple segments, then each segment could have its own campaign code, and they could all belong to the same group, so I can report on them later. If I've got a start date, which I'd have to have, of course, to put that in. So in this case, you can see, yes, I've got a start date that's going back very old, and I don't necessarily need to have an end date. In the case of something like general donations, if I'm not setting up, particular budget targets, etc. for the year, and I just said, look, it's just going to go on and on, because when I report, I can report from any date to any date and say, pull the details out for the date period that I want. If I do put an end date in there, and I'm when we look at doing the entries for the processing, the system will look at the end date and say, if the date has passed, it won't show us available when I'm doing the processing anymore. So it's like a way of archiving the list, because exponentially as I go on year after year, the list is going to get longer and longer and longer. If, in the case of this one, it's general, I don't want to put an end date in, so just enter. The system then pops up this screen here to ask me, is there something special about these transactions that I'm going to put in? So in the case of my memberships or something, I'd say, yes, they're pledges. For general, I'm saying no. And it now skips the next few questions to say, well, they're all subsets of a pledge. So I can have special pledge receipts, I can have one-off campaign, pledge campaigns, which been used primarily in the case of telemarketing and things like that, whether I've got a subscription, a membership campaign, or if I've got a child sponsorship campaign. So because I've said no to the first one, the next one takes me down to say, is it sales? Okay, there is a add-on module for Donman that you can also do products. So if I were to say yes, and I've got the product module activated, I can say yes, it's sales, and it has got products attached to it. So it just means when I process the payments, I can say this person's buying 2 of these T-shirts, 3 of these hats, whatever it might be, and that helps me with my stock taking. There also is the ability to run raffles through Donman or art unions, depending on which state we're in. We call them slightly different, and their fundamental difference isn't that great. Okay. An in memoriam campaign is any campaign that I want to set up where there's a tribute, basically. So if we wanted to remember somebody, I can do 2 things. I want to recognize, I want to thank the donor for their donation to us in memory of whoever it was, but I've also got the ability to very easily write to the next of kin to thank them for the, pass on our condolences and thank them for, the donations received in memory of whoever it was that's being remembered. The mechanism for in memoriam can be used for not just in the case of, funerals, can also be used in the case of anniversaries or birthdays or any other sort of event where there might be money coming in lieu of gifts or flowers. Is it a function campaign? Would be if I was, doing my functions and I've set that up and said when I record the transaction, I want to update the function record for the person that we looked at in the previous session, and it will automatically show how much the person's paid. Is it a bequest campaign, a major gift, and a grant campaign? These are things that are more in the system to help me when I look at the dashboard, and I can have certain sorts of payments. So when I look at my donation total for a year, I can say how much of that was grants, how much was major gifts, how much was bequests, etc. Update the summary history for this campaign. So that's the figures that we were looking at in the previous session on the donor record, where I've got summary totals for their highest gift, their last gift, etc. Sometimes there might be things where I only want to update the summary screen on the donor record for pure donations. I don't want to do it for sales and things like that. So depending on the campaign I set up, that's an option that you have. Okay. So as I enter through, if I have a target for my campaign, I can put that in, and that will initiate, as you can see here, going way over what I was expecting to get. So if I said, no, that's silly. Okay. So depending on what I put in the target, this will just indicate, here is a slide indicator to show me graphically where I'm at towards achieving the target for my campaign. If we put something in wrong, just change it, and the system will show that automatically. Okay. When I'm doing a normal mail out for an appeal, I would put how many people I mailed, and I'd also put my costs in, because these are the sorts of things that I want to report on later. So if we go back to there, okay, because if I don't put these figures in, I'm not going to get these percentage of responses, etc., and then I'm not going to get the figures that I really need to work out, where are my mailings working, or whatever my strategy might be. I'm not going to be able to report on it properly. If I don't put costs in, again, when I look at my profit figure, it's going to be, in this case here, would have been $220,715 instead of the $215 because I hadn't taken the costs into account. So when I enter down, where we will look at the first step of this process was the thank you letter, and this is where I can say, yes, I want to edit the letter code, and this is where I can have if I had a letter for new donors who'd never given before, I might have one called Gen New. Otherwise, I might have one just called Gen for people that had donated before, and it's just the text of the letter. Again, from what I've set up previously, I'll have the drop-down list, and that's where I can choose the letter that these people are going to get. Where the dollar figures are here, or the numeric figures are, something that we don't use very much nowadays, because it's very easy to put a word field into your document where I might be saying, based on the dollar amount, that I want to say thanks for your kind donation, you're generous, you're very generous, whatever levels you want. It's much easier to make, one smart letter than it is to have half a dozen different letters where really I might be changing one word or even half a sentence. Much easier to do in Word. So for most things now, we just put from any amount to, just under $1 million, because once we get to that sort of figure, these aren't the letters people get. Just go through. From there, I'd have my bank account set up and my ledger code. Yeah, so I could choose the ledger code that I wanted to use for that fund. And the last part of this is then the details for the receipts. So if it was a sale, then I might put sale on there, a donation, membership, whatever the actual payment purpose was, that's what I want to show on the person's receipt. And when we look at actually doing entries, I'll show you how you can split the donation in the system at the time we do the entry. On the screen itself at the bottom here, so where I can see that I've got 1,617 transactions from people, if I wanted to see the details of those, the dollar sign down the bottom is in red to indicate there's transactions. And if I click there, we'll build a history of the gifts that are there, so I can see absolutely every single gift. And if I wanted to resort it by amount or date or anything like that, I can do that here. Yeah, so if we wanted to resort by amount, when it has a bit of a think about it, I can do that, or I could sort by name, so whatever it might be. So if I wanted to find my highest, I can go right to the bottom and say, okay, there's my highest. And if I was getting figures like this in my general donations, I'd probably say that's gone into the wrong area, because I don't normally get donations that high in the case of general. Yeah. So from that, I've got summary details to show me sort of a year-by-year breakdown, and the system will work this out to show me for this campaign, has the change gone up or down, compared to the previous year. For my campaign costs, if I put my costs in, I can have different levels costs or different cost codes, and I can have the date and I can have the amount. On this particular one, you can see I've got two lots of fees that have come from an Everyday Hero import. So the system will do that automatically for me. Okay, so as we go through, I can have no end of campaigns. It's really just a matter of saying don't create, like everything with coding, you don't want to create more things than you actually need. And things like general donations, I don't really need to create, as I was saying before, something, this is general donations 2013, then 2014, 2015, etc. Because when we look at the reporting aspects of Donman, we'll be able to see that even though the campaign's been going for quite a long time, I can report on just the current month or the last financial year or the last 10 years. It really wouldn't matter to the system. Yeah. So if I've gone through and I've made some changes to my campaign, changed the ledger code, or if I've changed bank accounts, etc., I can then go through and just do a save on that, and that will save it. So just like donor record, in this case it's because I've gone back to the beginning, it's taken me through. So now I'm on a blank screen to say, okay, you've saved that one, and if I needed to do a new campaign, I just start typing the code in and filling in the details that I need in order to have that so that when I go to process payments, I've got something already set up, because the better I do this, the less pain or less things we have to think about when we're processing, because based on the campaign code, the system will automatically use the bottom half here where it's got the letter, the bank account, and the ledger code, will automatically pre-fill when I'm processing the actual payments. Okay, so that sort of concludes the actual look at the campaign setup within Donman. So if I just escape from there, and we'll go back to the home menu. Hello, my name is Gary from Donman, and welcome to another part of our series of Introduction to Donman. And what we've looked at previously was the donor entry in the main screen for adding contact details and setting up campaigns. And the next part of this process or the series will be looking at how we process payments through Donman. Yeah. So we've already set up our campaigns, we've got our donors, or we're creating them. So on our Start menu, we've got the main areas here, and the first one up the top is the donation processing. The menu in this case is in the order that it needs to be, because these are the logical steps that I create when I'm doing the transactions. So my first part of the process is to do the actual entry or record donations from their banking credit card listings, depending on what I'm doing with credit cards. I can create the receipt merge data file. Depending on, again, how I'm doing credit cards, I might have an entry like this one where it's creating a card fast data file for credit cards, a ledger report, a refer to report if I've got staff members I need to alert about transactions that have been recorded, and the end of day update. So from the time I start recording transactions in Donman at this point here, until I finish the end of day or the end of processing cycle update, everything will stay in the temporary file. So if there's a mistake discovered or anything like that, I don't need to worry about mucking up the main data files at this point, because everything's temporary and I can go in and do any editing that I need to. This menu here is purely for doing the one-off transactions. I've done an appeal and I've got checks or credit card payments, cash, hopefully not, but they do come in, postal notes, whatever. This is more for my manual processing. On the left-hand side of the menu, we'll see there's two entries here. One is for auto deduct, and the auto deduct is where I covered in the first session of the series of demonstration videos was looking at a donor's record where you can have an auto deduction pledge. So if I've got that, I can go through the auto deduction menu here, and on the nominated day of the month, I can run an auto deduction batch of transactions. Okay. So whether I'm using a gateway or whether I'm using a program to send the credit cards to the bank, the system will do the same thing. It'll look for all the pledges that are due or past due and create a batch of those donations for me. The other option on the left-hand side here is web donations, and this is depending on where your donations are collected. If you've got a web page with Donman, then this general web import donation program will be able to import the donors and the transactions.
Other than that, we start with the peer-to-peer module where we've got Everyday Hero, we've got the Go Fundraise file, there's also now a MyCause import program, and there, because online fundraising is becoming a much more widely used process for people to get donations from different organisations. So there are import programs, and for this webinar I'm not going to go into each of these, but it's really just so that you are aware that there are things or programs within the system that can be used to import that data, and it's really just a matter of purchasing the peer-to-peer module, and from there we'll get the programs, and it will read the data, it will do all the deduplication, reading the transactions, etc., instead of me doing a whole lot of manual entries. So what we're primarily going to look at today, though, is the record donations for the manual entries. So when I go into record donations, the system will say, am I doing a new batch? So the concept of a batch within Donman is just a manageable number of transactions. So if I had a chance and just had an appeal and said, oh look, I've just got a lovely load of mail in here, but I don't want to do them all in one hit, then I could say, yes, I'm starting a new batch. The system will allocate the batch number for me, and normally I would have a batch header screen that I filled, or had the operator fill out, that would have the date, who it was doing that, how many donations were being entered, how much money was banked or pre-banked. So in this case here, I would say I'm going to do 2 transactions, a very small batch, and this is where I can have how much money I'm going to bank and whether I've got money banked or pre-banked. So the difference between the banked and the pre-banked means that if somebody has made direct deposits into my bank account that I just need to record through the system and receipt, then that would be pre-banked. Everything that I've physically got to bank, as far as checks and cash and things like that, then that would all be a bank total. If, perchance, I've got, in this case, the 2 transactions and the total $300 to be banked, I've got nothing pre-banked, then I don't have to put a figure in there. When we write to people as part of an appeal, one of the options we have on the donor screen is to update the mail history, and if I've done that, I can then tell the system here that when I process these payments, always use the last mail code as the default campaign for my processing. For this particular one, I haven't done an appeal. I'm going to choose the campaigns manually, and the system will automatically put the operator code in, because when I log into Donman, that's what it's using, and it's also tracking what I'm doing and which programs I'm running. So when I enter through from there, the first thing I do then is find my donor, and as I discussed in the first session, looking at the donor screen, the 2 ways I would do that is either enter the donor number, if I put that on my coupon, and that's ultimately the easiest way. Otherwise, again, I would go down and I would look up my donor based on name or address. From there, I'd find my person, double click, and that will bring up the donor's record. Because I'm in the processing cycle, when I enter, the system by default will skip the whole screen unless there's something that it says is out of whack, like I've got a code on their screen or something that someone has deleted the actual underlying code in the system. By default, it will just say that's okay, and if I've got something to change or I've got an email address, I can certainly click back into that field and fill in what details I need to, but by default, to make it easier to put the transactions in, jump straight to the bottom. If I enter, it will take me through the second screen of the person's record, and again, if there's anything I need to update there, I've got the opportunity to do that. And what this also allows me to do is that if I've got a brand new person not on my system, I can add them at the time I'm processing. So I don't have to do the sort of housekeeping step first and then come and do the transactions. I can do them all as part of that one process. If I then enter, say I've now been through the 2 screens of my donor record, the donation date by default will go in, but if I was backdating stuff because it was something that had been directly deposited in the account or whatever it might be, I can change the date here. The system will store the 2 dates. One will be today's date, being the 4th of the 8th, or it will also store the entry date. So if by chance I had backdated this and said, okay, look, this should have been the 1st of August because I had something that came in last week that I haven't yet processed, I can put that in, but the system will store that it was actually entered today. So that comes in handy, especially the beginning of the financial year where we might be inundated with transactions and we just don't have time to get them all finished, but ideally they should be postmarked 30th of June, so that people can claim them on their tax for the previous year. From there, I'd put in the transaction amount. If I've got something that people have said, oh, here's the money, but I want this to go into 2 different areas or 3 different areas, then up the top here I can say that there's now 2 parts to this transaction. And down the bottom of the screen here, you can see I can now split the payment internally. So for banking purposes, I've got one payment of $150, but for the ease of me saying, well, some of this money was for a donation, the other part was for a sale or something like that, then I can certainly change that up the top of the screen. For the first one I'll just do a single transaction. From there I have all the pay methods. As you can see, quite a list of different pay methods that I can put in. If perchance I choose check, the system will then go across and ask me the bank and branch details off the check. Whether you use the BSB number or you put that it's ANZ and the branch, doesn't really matter to the system. A lot of organisations do like to use the BSB number because it's a whole lot less you have to type in, and it's going to be 100% accurate. With the big banks, that's fairly easy. When you get to the smaller regional banks or credit unions and things like that that are associated with a bank, sometimes it's hard to know what to put in there. Whereas if I use the BSB, it's never going to cause me a problem. If the drawer name was different from what was on the check, then I can just change this to suit, and the system will store that, so next time I process a check, that'll automatically come out. So I want that because, again, I might have a record where I've got a Mr. and Mrs. record, but the check has come from one, or I might have a single donor where it's a joint check account. So that way I can get the drawer name to suit, so when I do the bank deposit slip, that makes it much easier for the bank to reconcile. Because it's a check, it's now skipped the details here as far as added a card number, authority numbers and expiry dates, because it's saying not relevant. If I were to choose cash here, it would basically skip all of this part of the screen to say it's not relevant. So based on the pay method that you put onto this screen, the cursor will go to different areas to say, well, this is the next logical step for doing that sort of transaction. From there, I'd say, yes, I've said that this money needs to be banked. But if I was processing or backdating transactions and said, look, it actually got banked on Friday, but I didn't have a chance to bank it or enter it in the system, then I can still say that it was paid by check, say, pardon me, I don't need to bank it. So for this one, it is a live one, so I do need to bank it. From there, do I need to receipt it? If I say no to receipt here, the system will then take me down and ask me, is it something that's being manually receipted? And if I say yes, will then give me the option to put in the manual receipt number in this field next to that. So for this one, I'm saying no, I do need to receipt it. If I've got a refer to list, so I've got a bequest officer or someone, normally on the second screen of the person's record, I'd have a refer to code, and that will automatically populate here. But otherwise, I could have a list of codes here, or I might have the CEO, or I might have different staff members to alert to a particular donation based on dollar amount or whatever rules you've got set up, and I can certainly then choose the code from there. So for this one, I'm going to say there is no refer to. There's no extra remarks I need to put on the person's receipt. The dollar source code that I've got set up here is something that I can set in the system, and it allows me to add something extra to each of the transaction records to give me a further level of breakdown. So if by chance I'd advertised in a number of different magazines or media, and when the donations came in, I said, look, I've got one appeal, but I want to know how the replies are coming in, then I can create codes to identify how the replies are coming in without having to have 5 or 6 different campaigns for my different segments. Because in this case, people would have received the one mailing, so it's really part of the one appeal, but I want to know, which coupon they've sent in or, which mechanism they've used to actually go through. From there, because I've said one part at the top of the screen, I've now got the amount is $150. The next part of that is choose which campaign it is that I'm putting the money into. For the first one, I'm just going to use a general donation. It skips the next field because that's only used in the case of in memoriam donations. Yeah. So if I were to say no, this is an in memoriam gift. I then get the option to go across, and based on codes that I've set up previously, I can choose who it was that was being remembered. So for this one, we'll keep it a little bit simple. Okay, and I'm just using my general campaign. Automatically, the ledger code is put in based on what we set up in the campaign record. The letter goes in and the bank account. So when we looked at the previous part of the information and we've set up the campaign record, you can see now where this sort of reflects or impacts on that. So that when I'm processing, the operator doesn't need to know all of the details, they just need to know the purpose of the funds, and the rest of the screen will self-populate. So as I go through, if I've got a comment that I want to add to the donation, I've got that, and that'll become part of the transaction. There are 9 lines here because the maximum number of splits that you can do to a single transaction in Donman is 9 parts. Okay, so for most organizations doing general fundraising, the majority of donations or gifts would be 1 part. You may have 2 or 3 parts, but there's not many places, unless you're doing merchandising and things, that you have a split bigger than that. So in this case, I haven't got a comment to put in, so I can just enter and go through. So $150 from Mrs. Smith, and now I've got the option, I'm back on a blank screen, where again I can create a new donor if I need to, or I find an existing donor. Okay, so from there I can choose my next donor, do the same thing, I can go through. Okay, so you can see if there's any error where somebody has put a code onto a person's record but it doesn't actually exist in my data, then the system is going to stop me and tell me that there's something wrong. In this case, I'd say this is an individual record, and then I can save the record. Yeah, so again, if there's anything that I've got in, I am going to get alerted. So if somebody's been mucking around with the data in the background and they've changed something on the screen and not sort of impacted on the whole system, it's not going to let us through. So it is going to alert us that something is wrong with the records as we go through. Okay, so depending on what it was the person gave to, I can have my source code. Okay, so there's lots of checks and balances sort of built into the system to try and ensure the integrity of the data as we put records in. So where we're talking previously about codes and setup, etc., and I was mentioning that normally we'd only have, unless we've only got 1 or 2 people in the organization, we'd restrict who had access to that, because what we just saw then is not the sort of thing I want to have happen, where somebody's created codes and said, oh, I don't want to use that anymore, and instead of doing a proper cleanup or restructure of the data, they've just deleted the codes behind the scenes. It doesn't magically go through and update the whole database. So in this case here, the donation date is stored from the previous one I did, but if I want it to be today's date, I can just do T, and that will change it to today's date. So again, I've got another $150. I can say 2 parts. Then this one I can say cash, and you can see it's now skipped what the previous one went through because it's saying not necessary for cash. So again, yes, I need to bank it, I need to receipt it, and if I go through, the system will now say, hang on, you said 2 parts, but you haven't said how much the first part is. So if I said $100, and that's also going to the general one, okay, and then I said the next part was something different. Okay, so you can see I've got all sorts of things that I can then put through and choose. So I said, okay, they're buying Christmas cards, whatever it might be. Okay. Because it's set up where it's got products, I can then say what product the person is buying. Okay. So in this case here, of course, it's going to muck up because I've sort of put that through. Okay. So from there, I can then say how many items the person is buying. Okay. So it will start to tally up the dollars until I balance what I put onto the previous screen. If I don't balance, it's going to tell me that no, what you said isn't what you've actually put in here. Okay. So again, I can't put in an amount that the system says, no, that doesn't work. Nothing balances based on what you put in. Okay. So if I said, oh look, I want to try it at that, the system now telling me. Okay. So in order to use the products, I've really got to make sure that I'm selecting the right things. Okay. So in this case, okay, so if I try and get out of there, okay, so you can see all the checks and balances built into the system are going to stop me from mucking something up there. So it was at 575. Okay, so anything I do with products will do that. If the chance is that I shouldn't have been products and you know, I've got on that screen I don't need to, I can just basically go back up and they'll get me to the point where I can now say, okay, I've put that into the wrong place. I can then go through and say, no, where I want that to go is into a different area. Okay, so I can then choose a different campaign. So in this case, I just use the in memoriam. It then stops me to say who's being remembered. I can choose my person, the ledger code, etc. will go in, and again I can put a comment on that donation. Okay. So once I get to there, the system now comes up with a prompt to say what I said on the first screen was how many transactions have now been entered. The system will ask me, do I want to check and close that batch? So if I say yes, this is what I want to see, where everything balances. If per chance it doesn't balance, the system will alert me that what I said on the first screen when I set up the batch isn't what I've entered, and as such the batch won't close. Because what I want to really accomplish at this point is to get all my batches closed before I start doing my banking or my receipting, etc. So I want to make sure that everything balances at the very first point. I don't want to have to, you know, just do the entries blindly and then later on try and make sure that everything balances. So that's really the concept behind the batch. From there, once I've finished doing all my entries, and you don't have to do one batch and do all the paperwork, you can do as many batches as you need to in order to process them. So right on the bottom of the screen here, if I can keep that, so you can see that my progress is donations, and at the moment there's 2 donations in the temporary file and what my last receipt number was. So once I've done that, if I said I've created another batch and I've added another 10 donations, it'll just keep adding to that temporary file. Once I've finished all of my entries, that's where I start progressing down through here and saying now I want to do my banking and my credit card listings. So if I say yes, I want to do my banking, yes, if I've printed credit cards and I'm doing the actual, the old entry method of doing credit cards where I print out the merchant slip and sign it and put in the envelope, then I say yes, I want to print out the credit card forms automatically. Other than that, if I'm doing gateway for credit card, then when I process on the screen, it will automatically go to the gateway, and the system will change the pay method from Visa or MasterCard or Amex, whatever type I've used, to gateway. And that way, when I do the banking, I don't need to print those out because everything's gone through. So it's sort of like doing it through F+ prior to the actual entry. Okay. So in this case here, I can say, no, I don't need to print the credit card forms automatically. And if we just do a preview on the report, okay, so it's now showing me what would come out on my bank deposit slip. So when I'm doing the deposit for the bank, I don't need to, you know, rewrite out all the totals of, you know, the drawers' names and the check account details and all of those details. I can basically have that and say, yes, I've got a total of $300, okay, $150 in check, and how many checks I've got. So I can then do that, and this becomes part of my deposit that goes to the bank. Now that I've finished that step, the text on the screen has changed to red to tell me that that's the step that's been completed. The system won't allow me to go back into record donations now unless I go into donation troubleshooting on the side here and modify the progress, or I open the closed batch. Because once all my batches are closed and everything's balanced, I should be able to just progress through this whole cycle and finish it off. Okay, but there is the option that if I've discovered something's wrong or I've printed the ledger report or the receipts and spotted an error, I can go and open the batch and tell it to go back to record donations, because if I change something at this point, it's certainly going to impact on the rest of these things here. Okay, so if I, you know, change the amount on a donation, or I had to remove a donation because I accidentally doubled it up or something like that, that's certainly going to impact on my banking or my receipting. And now that I've finished that step, I can create the receipt merge data file. Okay. The system in this case just creates a file called names.txt, and everything to do with the actual processing cycle, the system will back up the last 7 of everything. So all of my reports, the actual data file itself, everything will be backed up. So if something goes wrong, we can fairly easily recover from that and do our merge. So in this case here, the system's allocating the next receipt number. I don't have to worry about any of these things as well, because I'm not doing barcoding or using other addresses, etc. label it and merge straight away would normally be yes. And down the bottom here is where I would choose the document that you're using to do your receipts. So once you've got your receipt template set up, okay, so even though in this case here I hadn't had that set up as far as telling the system what document to use, once I've done that, the system by default will store that and come up automatically next time. From there, all the fields that come out as part of the receipting, we're at the top here, we can see address 1 to 7 is the address block, which will, address 1 might be title, first name, surname, or it might be positional, or it might just be company, depending on what details we have on the donor. But basically, all of the details that are there, I've got. If I needed to add something else to the receipt letters that isn't there at the moment, so if I go down and said, oh look, I haven't got how the person paid, and I want to show that on the receipt. So then down the bottom of the screen here, I can say what I want to do is add to that output, and just about every field that we've recorded as part of that can be utilized. Okay, so you can see where I was saying before that there's 9, you can split a payment into 9 parts. So this is where you can start to see all of the parts of those things coming out. Okay, so just about everything that's there, you can say, yes, I want to add something to that, or I want to do something from the donor's record. Okay, so again, I can choose the donor file, and every field that's part of the donor's record, I can choose to add to the output, and that will stay as part of the output until such time as I automatically remove that. But the fields that come out by default can't be changed. They will come out no matter what, because they are the core fields for doing a receipt mailing. Okay. So normally, I just have to go here, continue. The system will say generating the thank you data file. It will then open up my document in Word. Okay. So this is where I would have my template set up, where I've got my receipt layout. However you want the receipt layout to be is totally depending on your letterhead or whatever you're using. They're just fields for all purposes. So in this case here, the last merge that it did was unsuccessful because it's telling me here there's an error on the screen to say it couldn't find the letter that that person was supposed to get. But ordinarily, hopefully you won't get that. So if I go to mailings, finish and merge, edit individual documents. Okay. So if I'm getting an error like this, I'm getting the rest of the details, I'm getting the name and address, I'm getting the receipt information, but what's not come across is the letter. If I have a look at that, I can see there's a path in the document here that says this is where to go and get the physical text of that letter. So if the path in the document is incorrect, or perchance I've got my document saved in the new format for Word where they're a docx, I need to make sure that this field, and normally whoever does the setup or installation for Donman will set this document up for you, and we'll make sure that that all works as part of the installation process, because you don't want to have what I'm having here, where it's saying, hang on, it couldn't find that particular document. But where the error is in this case, normally this is where the text of the letter would pre-fill. So as you can see, based on that field, it's just a field that says go and look at the data. If we look at the data in its sort of raw form here, I can see here, this is where I've got the document name. And so if perchance I've told Donman that the document's called letter gen, but in my actual directory or my folder I've called it letter general, of course the two aren't going to match. Computers are very literal and they don't like to do grey. Okay. If perchance I got to this point and said, oh, hang on, I've mucked that up, the two options I've got are to actually go and rename the letter to be what Donman has got, or I can change the data directly by going down the bottom here in Word, and I can change the letter code here so that I can get my merge finished, and then I can sort out the actual letter itself later. Okay. But for most purposes, we won't get an error, but it's really just at this point here to show you that if we do get an error, it is really just a field that says, we'll show you exactly where my letters are stored, and from that I could then go and have a look at my drive and make sure that the document, in this case my letter gen, was actually physically there so that I can do the merge successfully. So once these documents are set up, they're normally made as read-only so that we can't, or the operator can't accidentally muck them up. so that we have minimum issues, and the only issue then is like this one here, where it's saying you can't find that letter. Okay, so there's just something that I haven't done properly in my setup. Okay, so if perchance I said, okay, look, I've done that and I've opened Word and I've had an error, whatever's happened, I don't need to go back into Donman and create the receipt merge data file because it is still there. And until I do the next receipt run, I can use that at any time at all. So from there, I could minimize Donman. So what I want to do is go into Word, if it will behave. Okay, so if I then go into my directory, I'm looking for this folder here. Okay, so you can see here that my document wasn't called letter gen, it was called letter general. Yeah, so this happens quite a bit, unfortunately, where people have sort of set up their structure thinking one thing, and when they've done the document, they've called it something different. So the two options that I've got at this point here, I say, hang on, based on the code I set up in Donman, it was just called letter gen, so I can rename the physical document. Okay, so then I can cancel that. If I then go back in now and open my receipt template, go back to mailings, finish and merge. Okay, so now I'm not getting the error message, and the text of my thank you letter is being imported as part of that whole mechanism. Okay, so the setup itself is fairly simple, and as you can see, it's a recovery for if something goes wrong is fairly easy to do. Okay, so you don't have to be a mail merge guru or anything like that to do this, because the only two parts of it really are the receipt layout or the actual letter itself that doesn't come in, and the Word itself will give us the error messages. When we do the credit cards, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, there are a number of mechanisms for getting the credit cards to the bank. The oldest and probably the way we should not consider doing it at the moment is doing the merchant file, where we print out a summary of all the credit cards and stuff in plain text. We sign the form, we fold it up, stick it in the envelope, and that becomes part of our bank deposit slip. For most of the major banks, like the Westpac, ANZ, NAB, etc., all have different file formats, where based on credit cards that I've recorded through the system, I can use one of the programs to create a file in the format that the bank wants. And instead of me doing it the way of just doing a printed form, etc., the system will allow me then to log on to internet banking and upload the credit card details, and it's just basically a batch authorization of those. So there are a number of mechanisms for credit cards depending on what your final requirement is. In this case, I haven't processed any credit cards, so if I were to run this program, it would really say there's nothing to print. Yeah, but just so that we can see what it does do, okay, it says must be run after banking's run. If we do Amex and Diners, because depending on your bank and different things, sometimes you can't put them through the bank, so you still have to do them by printing out the form and sending it directly to Amex or Diners. The majority of banks nowadays, or of more recent times, I think, have got that ability where you can put them through the same as you can MasterCard and Visa cards. From there, we have the merchant number for the run, and the system will automatically create a credit card file. So down here, we print and export, and the file that it creates would be the file that we basically upload to the bank. The ledger posting report will be the summary of the money that I put in and the ledgers. So where I split a payment, each payment becomes its own part. So in this case here, because they've all gone into donations, even though it was general and it was in memoriam, they've all gone into the general donation or the donations received ledger code. So I've now got the total, and as you can see, based on how I put the money in, whether I said the money was to be banked or pre-banked, I'll get different totals for that, and that certainly helps me when we're putting that into the accounting system. If there's any GST, then that will show over the right-hand side here, and there'll be a total of GST for this lot as we go. Normally that is the report that would then be sent to accounts that they'd use to do a like a batch or a bulk entry into the accounts for the day instead of having to put in every single transaction, because that's what we're trying to rely on Donman for, is for the individual transaction level. For the higher level, we're really just saying that we want to have a total amount for that processing cycle. If I had processed the payment and I'd referred it to somebody, this is where I do the refer to report. And in this case, I said no, there wasn't any referred to, but I can now go through and do the end of day. So once I do this step here, the temporary file, down the bottom here, will become update, will be my progress, and there'll be no donations in the temporary file. So this is the step that will update the live data with what I've entered as far as my donations or from my temporary donation file. So it'll update the donor, the donation, the campaign, everything else will happen as part of this process. There's not much to it. So as I go through, I basically just enter. Unlike the other one, I don't have a print preview because this is one I normally print out because it is my audit report. So when that comes up, okay. So in this case, a bit of a delay because I'm printing it through the PDF printer. Okay. So you can see on the report, it will have your organization name, the date that we've updated the donors, and then have pretty much all of the details. So where I've changed the date on the first transaction, I can see the donation date, but I can see from the date here that that was the date of entry. Okay, so this is normally the report that we would print and store because it becomes my audit trail for all of the transactions. Okay, so now I can see end of day update is in red. Down the bottom here, update 0. There's no donations in the temporary file. My receipt number is incremented. So that is really the complete start to finish of doing the manual entries in Donman. But as I did mention before, there's certainly different programs for doing either an auto deduction batch run or doing import of web donations or peer-to-peer fundraising donations. Anyway, that concludes this part of the introduction series to Donman. So I'll go back to my start screen and leave you there for now. Okay, good afternoon, or hello, because it may be morning where you are. Welcome to this series, or another part of our series of Introduction to Donman. My name is Gary, and I'm a technical support person that you'll talk to if you're having problems with Donman, and we'll try and sort that out. What we've looked at so far is a number of parts of donor management, or Donman, as far as entering donors and donations and things like that. And the next part we're going to look at is then from all of the stuff that we've entered is segmenting the data to do mail outs or reporting, etc. So the area that we're going to look at in this section is the donor appeal section, which is basically the segmentation of the database. So if I go from my start menu into here, the very first option on that menu that comes up is create a donor selection file. A selection file in Donman is purely a list of donor numbers that I can then do something with the list of numbers in bulk. So I can create merge data file, I can update people's mailing history, I can change codes, I can do all sorts of things with the donor records in bulk as long as I've got a selection file. So in this case, I'm going to go in, and you can see up the top here, there is a number of tabs that all associate with different parts of the data that we've recorded. Okay, so it depends on what you're trying to segment, what questions we answer. And it's like any sort of segmentation you do on a database. The more complex you make it, you might end up with very few records, or whatever it might be. Sometimes you ask too many questions. Not so much too many questions, but your criteria is too complex, and nobody has all of the things that you asked for. So in this case, we're going to look at something just for doing a mailing, which will be fairly straightforward. So what I need to do is put in the name for my mailing. Okay, so give it a nice English name so when you look at it later, you know exactly what that list was created for. Just like when we do reports, if I've got a report format that I've said, look, the criteria of this list will never change, I can, at the end of this process, save that and use that format again just to run against the data live. For this particular one, I don't have a format, so I can say, no, I haven't got a save format. If I say yes, though, any save format that I had would be here, and I can then just choose that from the list, and it means that all the rules that we'll go through on the screens shortly will be already answered, and I don't need to do that again. I can go straight from here and say I want to finish, which means I don't have to go through any of these questions because they're all predefined. For this particular one, I'm saying I don't have that luxury. I'm going to have to select these people. So if I enter there, I then start going through the tabs. So on the first one, if I'm trying to segment based on dollar amount or number of gifts or whatever it might be, as far as a donation total, then this is where I can segment the data to say, look, I'm looking for people that have given me, $1,000, one or more gifts in this date range. From those figures, I can choose or exclude specific campaigns, which is something that we looked at in one of the earlier sessions. Okay. So for this particular list, I'm going to say I'm not really getting down to that nitty-gritty level of finding my donors. So if I enter, we'll skip that tab. And on the next tab, I can say I'm looking for people with their last donation date between. So this is normally the area where I choose my current donors, my lapsed donors, whatever it might be. Whereas if I was trying to choose, my top donors, then I would use the previous tab because it's the dollar amount that I'd have as a limit to say, well, people who've given me over this will be considered my top donor segment. So it really depends on how you're segmenting your data to do your mail out, but certainly the options are here. So if I were to say 12 till today, so that will then extract everyone whose last gift was between the 1st of the 1st, 2012 and today. If I was trying to find lapsed donors, I might go from the 1st of the 1st, 2010 till the end of 2011. So the actual parameters that you use are totally up to you and how you need to segment your data. From there, I can have people whose first donation date was between certain dates, and this might be where I'm trying to find people that are new acquisitions. Okay. So if I'm doing a general mailing, I'm saying, well, I don't really care, when they were created in this case, because they could have been on my database for 10 years or more, but I just want to know if they've given me a date recently. So as I go through the process, I've got all the questions about their highest amounts, their last amounts. I can choose things that people have given to or exclude them. The only defaults in this process are where I've got people who've got a mail code of no mail or a no mail until after today, or there's a date of death field on the donor's record. So we can mark the record so that these are the defaults. No matter what else we've got on their donor screen or their main screen, the system can exclude those people from the mailing. So as we go through, lots of questions. We can select people based on their mail codes, their mail lists, and any of these things I say yes to, I'll then get a screen where I can choose the code or codes that I'm looking for. Okay, so if I want more codes, I just keep going until I've finished all of them. If perchance what I'm selecting, I want people to have 2 or more of the codes, in this case I've only selected a single code, but if I had multiple codes, then I can say they must have between 2 and whatever of the codes above. So it really depends on what it is we're trying to segment. For a mailing, fairly simple. Normally we've identified what sort of mailing this donor is going to get, so that's the only thing I need to select. So as I go through and get through the screens here, I don't have to go through every single question, because if I said what I'm looking for at this point is everyone who's on the newsletter list whose last donation was since the 1st of the 1st, 2012 till today, I can now skip these other screens to say they're not relevant for what I'm trying to find. But as you can see on the screen, there are fields for select by donor type, my categories, my extra codes, my region codes, all those different things that we've identified on the actual person's record or the company's record. These are things that I can use and use in conjunction when I'm doing my selection file. Okay, so I can get down to postcodes, particular states. I can select by particular country codes, select donors based on their donor numbers. The age from, of course, will only work if I've got date of birth, acquisition dates. I've got flag fields, which are more global, include or exclude groups of people. Okay, or I can go straight to selection and finalize. So there is lots of questions here, but without all of the questions, you don't have flexibility to do the segmentation that we're trying to do most of the time. So in this case, I'm going to keep this one very simple and just go through. By default, Donman saves or outputs the selection file into postcode order, because normally I'm doing this for a mailing, but if I wanted to do alpha, I can just choose alpha order. So for this one, I'll say now, look, I'm going to keep it on postcode order. Yes, to begin. The system will then show me how many donors I've got in total, very quickly, sorry, and how many records got selected. All of the questions that I've said yes and no to will come up on this screen. So it's a print preview of all my selection criteria. So if I got to the end and said, oh, hang on, I haven't got enough records or I've got too many, I can certainly have a look at my criteria, and from that I might then be able to say, okay, look, I've said this, include this group of people or exclude these group of people that really I didn't want, and that's going to skew my numbers. Okay, but all of the criteria that we've put in, where I put my dates, etc., we can see there. The system will store that away so that if I did need to know how a particular selection was run previously, all the questions are there, and I can certainly open the file and redress that later. Once I've done that, I've now got a list of people, and most of the things that are on this particular screen will use that selection to do different things. I can do a short summary of the donor info, which is basically a list of the donors, and will show me their last donation and things like that. The primary use for this is normally to do a mailing. So from there I would go down and say, oh, I now want to create a mail merge data file. Okay. So all the previous updates or selections that I've done are here. And if we look down, we can see our August 2014 newsletter. So you can see why giving it a nice English name is a very good idea. The system by default will count how many records are in that file. So when I'm doing it, if the number comes up and I know that it's totally the wrong number, I know that it's a good chance I've selected the wrong file up the top here. Okay. Apart from that, I can go through and say, what is it that I'm trying to extract? I have got an option to extract an amount for each person based on their total in a period of time. I can use second addresses. I can use formatted names and addresses, which is when we looked in the previous part of the receipts, it's just an address block. So for this one, I'm going to leave all the default values. The system will create a selection, a text output file name of a pl.txt, and this is primarily that if I was doing a mailing where I'm using labels, etc., like that, then I can have a label document set up that's all automatically using this as the data source, and I'm just overriding it with the current list of people. For things other than that, I would normally just copy the name of the selection file and make that the same as my text file. So the file that comes out of Donman is a purely tab-delimited text file that I can use with Word or Excel to do my merging. If I've got a document set up to automatically use this file, then down the bottom, like we did when we looked at the receipting previously, I could say, yes, load word and merge, and I can select my document. For this one, I'm going to say, no, I want to put this data into Excel. So if I say no there, all of the fields that come out on this next screen here, above the dotted line, will come out no matter what, because they're my core fields for mailing. But everything under that, just like when we looked at the receipting in an earlier session, I can choose donors and choose any field that I want to include from the donor record, and that will be added to this list and will stay there until I physically remove it. So if I wanted their phone numbers or mobile numbers, etc., to always come out, then I can add those to the list and they will always come out. For most things, once I get this to a point where I say, look, they're the fields that I use 99% of the time, I don't have to worry about stopping on this screen. I can just click on continue, and the system will go through and now create the mail merge data file, which has got the names and addresses in. So from there, I could use, as I said previously, I can use that to do a Word mail merge. I can use it to open the file in Excel. I can use the selection file to then update the donor's mail summary history. So when I do a mail out for a campaign, I can then say, for this list of people, I'm mailing them for this campaign, and update all the contact details. So when I look at the person's record, I'll know that they did receive a particular mailing. Okay? So in a nutshell, that's pretty much just the selection process. And yes, there's lots of questions, but without lots of questions, sadly, we don't have the flexibility to get into the data and extract the data the way we want to. So that will sort of conclude the donor appeals section. Thanks for joining us today. And the next part we'll look at is some of the basic reporting in Donman. Okay, thanks for your time. Hello, my name is Gary, and I'm a technical support person at Donman Management. And welcome to another part, and I think this is the last part of our series of introduction to Donman and some of the components of the system and what we can use it for. So previous ones that we've covered already would be, our donor screen, our processing, setting up campaigns, doing segmentation for mailing, etc. In the last of this series, what we're going to look at is just some of the basic reporting that you can do out of donor management. So if I go from my start menu, which is basically the place that when you first log into the system you'll be put, and from there I've then got my main areas up the top of the screen here. So for this one, we're going to go into the reports, and these are the different sorts of reports that we can run. Okay. So there are quite a few preset reports in the system, and there's also an ad hoc report generator. So the most commonly run reports at most organizations will be either campaign reports or ledger reports. So what we're going to do for this session is just look at some of the basic campaign reports and the ledger reports, and you'll see on the menus when I go into them, there are quite a few preset reports for doing different sorts of analysis on your data. So if I go into campaign reports, the most commonly run report at just about every organization, or reports should I say, would be the periodic campaign result or the summary cumulative report. So under the periodic campaign results, it is very flexible because in here I can choose any date range at all that I want to report on. Till today's date. And from there I can select or exclude campaigns by group to include in my report totals. So if I just want every donation or transaction in the date range, I just need to put the date range in. I don't need to include or exclude any specific things. I can go through and say what I want is a subtotal for every ledger code in that date range. I mean every campaign code. Down the bottom of the screen you will see that the output that we'll see when we run the report is also exported to a tab delimited text file that we can then use to open in Excel if we wanted to do something further with that raw data. So most of the reports in the system, like the preset reports, will do that automatically. So if I say yes, I've then got the option here to, I can either print it to the printer, print preview, which is the most common thing people do first. The system will then run through, look at my transactions in the date range that I've specified, and as you can see in this case I've got dummy data, so the figures are very low. But for each campaign that I've had in the system, in the date range that I've specified, the system will show me the campaign, the description, the total of dollars, the number of transactions, if I put costs on there, my average and my median figures. So that'll come out for each of those. If by chance I said, oh, okay, I want to go to the next level and I want to find out the people that have given to my general donation campaign here. Then if I escape from the print preview, I can leave the dates there because that was how I ran the previous run. And then I can say I want to select the campaign by name, select my campaign from the list, go through, and then if I enter down, in this case I want to say no to subtotal, and again I'll do my print preview. So it's now picked up and it will show me down to the individual transaction level all of the transactions. I'll be able to see who it was, what date they gave, what day number, which receipt number they received, all of those details. And normally I'd use that if for some reason I wasn't balancing, with the account system, or I just had some further question about it. So if I looked at a campaign for chance and said the figure in there looks too high because somebody's put in, what should have been a memoriam donation or a grant or a bequest or something like that in the wrong campaign, I can then get down to every single transaction and from that say what I need to do about fixing that transaction. Okay. So when I do this particular report, it will look at all the donation records themselves and will rebuild the totals. The next one down, the summary cumulative report, doesn't ask me a date range because it looks at the campaign from the date it was set up to current. So if I was just looking for current campaigns, I might say I want to exclude anything that was closed prior to the beginning of this year. Again, I've got the option to select campaigns by name or by group. And again, any of these I say yes to. I can go and choose what it is that I want to report on. Okay, so if I was just looking for donations, or I'm just looking for membership campaigns or sales, etc., then I can choose the group appropriate. Where on this list here, I can see I've got raffle and raffles. Doesn't help me when I'm doing this sort of reporting, but that's more just about a setup problem where I then go back and look at them and say, well, I've got, most of my campaigns are under raffle, not raffles, so I'd find the one that was the opposite and I'd fix it so that they all became part of the one group. So for this particular one, I'm going to say, no, that's not relevant. I don't need to pick that. I can go through and print. If I do then print preview, okay, we'll come up where automatically based on the group that I've set the campaign up, we'll put the donations by group. I'll have all the individual segments of the group will be there. And as I go across, I can see I've gone a bit further than the previous report because I'll have the data last gift, how much money's come in, the number of gifts, the average gift. But now I'm getting to things like unit mailed, my response rates, my total cost, my unit cost, my profit and loss figure, dollar return, the number of new donors, and the percentage of the total response that was from new people. So it gives me a whole lot more information than the previous report. So this really stops, once I get here to say, well, this is more about just the money. This one's more looking at my stats. So the better I group my donations, etc., and if I've got, a whole lot of segments to a particular mail out, then I can certainly see all these segments of the mail out in the one part of the report, and I'll have a subtotal for each, and I'll have a total for the group. So it makes it nice and easy, and at the bottom of the report, you'll have a list of, all the totals. So for all of the groups, etc., included in your report. Okay. So there are lots of reports, as you can see, and most of these will be based on, like quarterly reports, end of month, day-by-day reports, consecutive year gift report. There is a mechanism in the system to do soft credits of donations, so you can report on all of those sort of things. The ledger reports is similar, where I'm trying to reconcile more against the accounting than I am against the campaign. So where I've put the ledger codes into Donman when I've recorded my transactions, I can go through there. I can choose particular ledger codes. Again, I can select campaigns by name and by group, which is what we covered when we looked in a previous session at the campaign setup for Donman. So like all the others, I can say, look, I want to select my date range, which might be, in the case of your live data, would be the current month, so you're doing an end of month total, or you're doing a financial year report, so that you can include that in your reporting mechanisms or your annual report. So again, if I just said I want a subtotal for every ledger code in the date period I've selected, and like the previous one, you can see that it's also exporting to a text file down the bottom here. So again, most of the reports that you run will have print preview, so we don't have to worry about selecting the wrong option and printing out lots and lots of things. So you can see here now that even though I had quite a few campaigns on the campaign report, I've only used 3 different ledger codes in the period. So it's now just giving me more of a summation based on the accounting. So if I was doing the same thing, so look, at the end of each month I want to do a reconciliation report between the accounting system and my Donman system, then this is sort of the report I'd run at the subtotal level, because if I balance, then I go, beautiful, I don't need to worry. If I don't, exactly the same mechanism exists where I can go through and say, look, I don't want a subtotal. I want to get every single transaction listed, and from that is where we start to see where we might have errors. Okay, so I can then get to every single transaction. Okay, so there shouldn't be any big reports that, or things in the data that we can't get to easily sort of reconcile as we go through. There are statistical reports, as you can see, there's postcode analysis, there's age file by first donation, by last donation, there's upgrade. So there are quite a few reports in the system that are preset, and you just answer the questions that you need to. There is also a table report generator if we wanted to look at one of the data files and do a cross-sectional sort of analyzation of maybe things like donor type by mail codes or source codes or any of those things. So I can choose any two fields in any data file and report on those. If perchance what I'm looking for is something more customized and I can't get all of the other details out, I can go to the report writer. And this is, for all purposes, the ad hoc report writer, where I can choose any file at all in the system, and I can do a report on it. The four that you see at the top here are the four most common reports that we do, or the files that we report on. So in this case, if I was choosing something like donation, because I want to get down to individual transaction level, and I'll just quickly do a report. So I can then choose how I want to sort it. I can choose donation date, and I'll have all of my normal criteria for equals, not equal, less than, greater than, as you do in most things where you're doing some sort of reporting on your data. So if I said donation date greater than or equal, if I click in here, I've got a number of options as far as dates go. If I'm looking to set up a report that was just for the current financial year, then as you look down here, I can see F is the first day of the current financial year, no matter what. Okay, so, or I can do months, or I can set up quarters. So there's quite a few things I can do as far as setting up a report to be fairly consistent all the time without me having to manually enter the date parameter. If I wanted to, of course, I said, okay, I'm looking for everything greater than, okay, whatever date I was looking for. If I wanted to capture the data or encapsulate that, I can then do the same thing, and I just keep adding more criteria. And in this case, I then say less than and put in my second date, okay, or any of the other fields. If I wanted to add some criteria based on the money and the person, then I can go back to here, and instead of donation at the top, I can go back to my donor file, and I can do criteria based on the person's record as well. So very flexible for what I can do. Okay, for this one, we'll keep it very simple. I'll just do donation greater than or equal. If perchance I wanted to do something like pay methods or things like that, and I said, look, I'm not quite sure what pay methods are in the system, then I can find my file, sorry, my field. So in this case, method equals. If I click in the value box, I've now got a question mark, and if I click on there, we'll go through the data and actually show me how many records I've got each of my pay methods. Okay, so you can see we've got some old data here because we've still got bank card, which doesn't exist nowadays. But sometimes I just want to get a number, and I want to get an idea of how much come out. You know, how many transactions I'm getting from different pay methods, or I just want to choose that for part of my report file. Yeah, so I can choose any of those. So it just gives me the flexibility to be able to do things quite easily. From there, I can say what I want to report on is I want the donor ID, I want to know how much they gave, what campaign, what donation date, and what ledger code. From there, if I said I now want to also export their donor's name, just like up the top where I did the criteria, I can now go back and say from the donor file, I want to select first name, surname, okay, and the company. Okay, so all of the fields are here. Once I've done that, expand that, I can go to preview. Okay, so that will now bring out all of the details. I can resize my columns. If I needed to join columns, say, so I wanted to do first name and surname as one column, I can right-click on that, merge that with surname, okay, and then I can just rename it to name. Okay. So quite flexible what I can do. At the moment, I'm just getting raw data, so I'm not going to have a total, and I'm not going to have anything added up or things like that. If I then go back to design, I can then say for my donor number, I want a total and count how many donors there are, so how many transactions. And for the amount, I want a total and I want to sum it. So if I go back to preview, when it runs, I've only got the one page. So if I now go down to the bottom of the page, I can now see how many transactions there are and the total of dollars. Okay? So I can set this up to be a printed report, as I've sort of done this one very quickly, or I can set it up where I can say file, save report data, as text, HTML file, or as just a selection file. So fairly simple, fairly straightforward, but powerful as far as what I can do with the file. If I wanted to save the report, I could say, yes, save that file, so I can run it again, so that next time I go in, I don't have to do all the work again. I can do File, Open Report Format, and all of my previous reports that I've set up, I'll have in my list here, and I can then just go and choose the report without having to do the whole criteria again. So it makes it fairly easy for doing my reporting as we go through. So lots of reports in the system itself. Most of them are predefined where you just answer a couple of questions about dates or codes that you're looking for, but certainly the option there to do your own reports and you know, you can change the font, you can do whatever you like with it, is there in the system, and hopefully there won't be too many things you can't get out of there. So anyway, that sort of concludes our quick look at reporting in Donman, and that's about the last of our sections. Hopefully that's been informative, and I'll leave you all now. Thanks for your time. Bye now.